Inside a factory in Oregon, a production line was built to manufacture as many as 10,000 humanoid robots a year. To an investor, it looks like the beginning of a new industrial revolution. Machines building an army of workers that never sleep, never call in sick, and can be rented out by the hour. But there is a problem. The factory has capacity for 10,000 robots a year. Agility Robotics has publicly disclosed committed orders covering roughly 1,000 under a multi-year arrangement. And even after a robot has been built, shipped, and placed inside a warehouse, it may still fail to produce a single profitable hour. Because a humanoid robot factory is not really selling machines. It is selling a promise that those machines can work long enough, reliably enough, and cheaply enough to compete with human labor. The most important number in this entire business is not how many robots the factory can build. It is how many profitable hours each robot can survive. Imagine you own this factory. One robot has just started moving down your assembly line. Call it Unit 37. It is not a specific company's machine, but it represents the economic journey every industrial humanoid eventually has to make. Before Unit 37 takes its first step, you have already paid for motors, batteries, sensors, computers, metal parts, engineering labor, assembly time, testing, and the working capital needed to hold everything together. You have spent the money. You still cannot send the customer a full invoice. You only get paid when Unit 37 leaves your building, enters someone else's workplace, and completes useful work without constantly needing a human to rescue it. That is the first secret of this business. A robot company does not fail because its robot cannot move. It fails because the robot cannot earn. That distinction changes every decision you make as the owner. Investors may reward you for announcing a larger factory, a faster production line, or a robot that looks more capable than the previous version. Customers reward something less glamorous. They reward a machine that arrives on time, completes a specific job, and does not become the most demanding employee in the building. Those two expectations can pull the company in opposite directions. The capital market wants evidence that you can dominate a huge future industry. The warehouse manager wants evidence that Unit 37 will move today's containers before the evening shift ends. If you build for the first audience and disappoint the second, the factory can look more successful each year while the underlying business becomes weaker. The factory is only one part of the company you have to finance. Behind it sits a hardware team designing the body, an AI team teaching that body to respond to the world, a deployment team installing it, and a service operation keeping it alive after the sale. These groups consume cash long before a large fleet begins producing predictable revenue. Agility's preliminary financial information shows how heavy that burden can become. The company spent tens of millions of dollars on research and development in a single year, even though its Oregon factory had already been built. That money was not spent laying concrete or installing lights. It went into making the robot safer, more capable, easier to manufacture, and less likely to freeze when reality stops matching the demonstration. Unit 37 now reaches its first assembly station. A technician installs one of its legs. Another connects the battery and control electronics. Cameras and sensors are calibrated. The robot is powered on, balanced, tested, shut down, adjusted, and tested again. The image is futuristic, but the factory is not free of human labor. It still needs assemblers, quality technicians, manufacturing engineers, software teams, supply chain planners, and people capable of diagnosing a machine that combines mechanics, electronics, and AI. The irony is hard to miss. People are building a machine advertised as the future of work while performing the difficult work required to make that future possible. At this stage, a small design change can become financially painful. Suppose Unit 37 receives a stronger hand. That hand needs a different motor. The motor draws more power, which changes battery life, heat, balance, wiring, software, testing, and the spare parts technicians will need later. One improved hand can force changes through the entire body. Now imagine discovering that problem after thousands of robots have already shipped. This is why a factory cannot mass produce a prototype. A prototype is built to prove that something is possible. Engineers can reset it between demonstrations, replace a weak part, or quietly step in when it gets confused. A commercial robot has to repeat the same task on an ordinary Tuesday when the engineers who created it are hundreds of miles away. Behind the physical factory is a second factory made almost entirely of software. It tracks which motor, battery, hand, and software version went into Unit 37. Without that system, a replacement part manufactured 6 months later may not fit the robot already working inside a customer's warehouse. Nobody watching a humanoid demonstration sees this hidden factory. They see the robot walking, lifting, and responding to commands. They do not see the inventory records, revision controls, quality failures, or rows of machines waiting for one incompatible part. At low production volume, custom components remain expensive and tooling is divided across only a few robots. As production increases, larger supplier orders and standardized assembly can push the cost of each machine down. That is the promise of scale. But Unit 37 reveals the other side. If one actuator fails, the rest of the robot does not continue earning money at 90% capacity. The entire body may sit still, while every working component inside it waits for one failed part to be replaced. The most expensive component may not be the one that breaks. It may be every other component forced to sit idle beside it. Unit 37 eventually passes final testing and walks off the line. The factory celebrates. Financially, the robot has achieved almost nothing. It may spend time waiting for a customer site to become ready. The customer may need to approve the workflow, train employees, clear a safe operating area, connect the robot to internal systems, and decide who is responsible when the machine stops. During that delay, Unit 37 is neither ordinary inventory nor a productive worker. It is a completed capital asset consuming storage, insurance, software support, and attention while earning little or nothing. Shipping it does not solve the problem. Shipping simply moves the financial test from your factory floor to the customer's floor. It still has to survive the customer. The first destination is a warehouse pilot. The job appears simple. Pick up containers, carry them across a work area, and place them where human workers can use them. But a warehouse is not a controlled demonstration stage. People step into the robot's path. Containers arrive dented or at the wrong angle. The floor changes. The wireless network weakens. Peak season pushes the workflow faster, and someone parks a cart exactly where the machine expects an open route. Unit 37 stops in the middle of an aisle. The warehouse manager does not care how advanced its AI looked in a launch video. A worker has to move the obstruction. A remote operator has to help the robot recover, or a technician has to diagnose the problem while every pallet behind it waits. Each minute of downtime creates pressure on both sides. The customer is paying for work that is not happening. The manufacturer is paying people to restore a machine that is not generating value. Picture the human chain created by one confused robot. A warehouse employee stops what she is doing to keep coworkers away from it. A supervisor calls the support line. A remote operator studies camera feeds and tries to reset the task. If that fails, a technician may have to travel to the site, open the machine, replace a component, test it, and document what happened, so the same failure does not spread across the fleet. The robot was supposed to remove repetitive labor. During downtime, it can temporarily create several new jobs that exist only because the automation failed. For the customer, this is an operational interruption. For the manufacturer, it is a service cost, a damaged relationship, and a warning that every similar robot may carry the same hidden weakness. So what exactly counts as a working hour? There are hours when Unit 37 is powered on. There are hours when it is moving. There are hours when a human is supervising it. And there are hours when it completes genuinely useful work without blocking the rest of the operation. Only the last category supports the financial promise used to sell the robot. This is where the human story becomes uncomfortable. If Unit 37 replaces one warehouse task but needs a remote operator, a field technician, an integration engineer, and a supervisor to remain productive, did it eliminate labor or move that labor somewhere less visible? The answer may change as the technology improves. For the factory owner, the accounting cannot wait. The customer wants throughput now. Downtime is the enemy that connects almost every risk in this business. A faulty motor creates downtime. A failed software update creates downtime. A weak battery creates downtime. Waiting for a replacement part creates downtime. A robot that cannot understand a slightly different container creates downtime. Even a safety concern creates downtime, because the machine cannot operate until the customer knows employees can work around it safely. The United States does not currently have one OSHA standard covering the entire robotics industry. Deployments still have to address familiar workplace hazards such as electrical failures, moving machinery, unexpected control behavior, and people entering the robot's path. New federal restrictions on foreign-produced advanced robotic devices add another complication. Domestic manufacturing may gain protection from some imported competition, but companies also face greater pressure to prove where critical systems come from and whether those systems can be trusted. None of this kills the business. It does make Unit 37 more than a product. Once deployed, it becomes a long-term obligation. If the customer purchased the robot, the warranty and maintenance agreement determine who pays when it stops. If the customer rents it through Robotics-as-a-Service, much more of that responsibility remains with you, the manufacturer. That sounds dangerous because it is. It is also where the largest revenue opportunity may be hiding. Selling Unit 37 gives you cash today. Renting it can generate much more revenue over time. In an illustrative model published by Agility, one robot is priced at roughly $8,500 per month. If the machine remains under contract for 5 years, the cumulative revenue can approach $500,000. Revenue, not profit. You still had to manufacture Unit 37 before the first monthly payment arrived. You paid to deploy it, connect it to the customer's workflow, deliver the software, stock replacement parts, and send help when it stopped in the aisle. The $500,000 promise only works if the robot survives long enough to collect it. This creates a simple-looking calculation with a dangerous denominator. Take every dollar spent building, deploying, maintaining, financing, and repairing Unit 37. Then divide that total by the number of hours it performs genuinely useful work. That is the cost per reliable, productive hour. If Unit 37 runs smoothly across multiple shifts, the denominator grows, and each productive hour becomes cheaper. If it spends more time waiting for technicians, every successful hour becomes more expensive because the same manufacturing cost is spread across less useful work. Sticker price can hide that difference. A cheaper robot with poor uptime can cost the customer more than an expensive robot that works consistently. This is also why the most profitable customer may not be the company that orders the largest number of robots. A customer with one standardized task across many identical facilities could be cheaper to serve than a larger buyer, demanding custom behavior at every location. The factory earns more when the same machine, software, and maintenance process can be repeated without rebuilding the solution each time. Robotics-as-a-Service turns one robot into 5 years of recurring revenue. It also turns one robot into 5 years of repair bills. And it creates a cash flow problem that becomes more dangerous as the factory grows. Unit 37 consumed most of its manufacturing cost before deployment. The customer pays for it 1 month at a time. Now multiply that timing gap across 100 robots, then 1,000. The factory buys components, pays workers, completes testing, and ships machines before years of subscription revenue arrive. Faster production can therefore increase the amount of cash trapped inside robots that have not yet paid for themselves. This creates an uncomfortable moment for the owner. The income statement may show a growing base of contracted revenue, while the bank account feels the cost of building the fleet first. A company can therefore appear to be winning customers, and still need fresh financing to fulfill the contracts it has already signed. If new capital arrives, the company can keep manufacturing while subscriptions mature. If financing becomes more expensive or investors lose patience, the production ramp may slow at exactly the moment customers expect more robots. The better the long-term RaaS opportunity looks, the larger the short-term funding problem can become. This is why the gap between 10,000 units of annual capacity and roughly 1,000 robots in disclosed committed orders matters. It does not prove the factory will run at 10% utilization. The orders cover multiple years, and successful pilots could lead customers to expand. It proves something more basic. The ability to build can grow faster than the willingness of customers to deploy. Perfect reliability would not remove that cash flow problem. It would only make the eventual revenue more likely. The factory still pays for the robot before the customer pays for the years. Scale helps when Unit 37 becomes boring. The design stops changing. Suppliers deliver consistent parts. Assembly workers see the same problems repeatedly and learn how to prevent them. Customers deploy the same tasks across multiple buildings. Technicians know which parts fail, how long repairs take, and what inventory must be kept nearby. Under those conditions, production rises while the cost and difficulty of each deployment fall. Scale becomes dangerous when every robot is slightly different and every customer requires a custom solution. More production creates more inventory. More deployments create more support tickets. More hardware versions create more generations of replacement parts. Automation can create unsold inventory faster. It can also multiply a defect before the company realizes the defect exists. This business can now move toward 3 very different outcomes. In the downside version, Unit 37 can walk, lift, and perform impressive demonstrations, but it needs too much help in the real world. Pilots fail to expand. Downtime destroys the labor savings, and the factory keeps spending while machines wait for profitable jobs. The company does not fail because the robot cannot move. It fails because the robot cannot earn. The failure may not arrive as one dramatic collapse. It can begin with a pilot extended for another month, a customer delaying its next facility, a component replaced more often than expected, and support teams growing faster than the installed fleet. Each problem looks manageable alone. Together, they quietly raise the cost of every productive hour until the original labor-saving promise disappears. In the middle version, humanoids succeed at a narrow group of repetitive tasks. The market is smaller than investors hoped, but real customers continue paying because the machines solve specific labor problems. The factory survives by becoming useful rather than universal. In the winning version, Unit 37 becomes a platform. One reliable body performs standardized tasks across hundreds of facilities. Installation gets faster, uptime improves, maintenance becomes predictable, and recurring revenue grows without support costs rising just as quickly. The winning robot does not need to look the most human. It needs to earn more money than it consumes. That is the real ownership verdict. A humanoid robot factory can become an extraordinary business, but 10,000 machines stepping off the line would not prove it. The proof arrives one productive hour at a time. After manufacturing, software, deployment, financing, maintenance, downtime, and replacement parts have all taken their share. Every robot leaving the factory is both a product and a promise. And promises are expensive to mass produce. If humanoid factories are preparing to sell physical labor by the hour, the next question is who owns the electricity, chips, and data centers powering that labor?